Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North Idaho College Public Forum. The crew is comprised of North Idaho College television students. Your moderator is North Idaho College political scientist Tony Stewart.
Wish to discuss with you a topic that has received much attention across this country and in fact in other countries in recent years, and is particularly drawing attention as certain things happen in this field. I'm speaking of hazardous materials and hazardous waste sites that have been growing in our country and have certainly drawn the attention of the experts as well as the general public. In order to discuss that important topic, I'm very pleased to welcome to our program today three guests. First of all, I would introduce to you Dr. Richard Roberts, who is a specialist in toxicology and environmental chemicals and is with the state lab in Boise, Idaho. Dr. Roberts, welcome to our program.
Thank you.
Also today visiting with us is Marcia Manley, who is an environmental health specialist with the Panhandle Health District in this part of our state. Marcia, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
And our third guest today is John Ogard, who is with Burlington Northern Railroad, and he is a manager of hazardous materials and fire prevention with that corporation. Also travels and tries to assist others in talking about this important topic and doing training sessions such as the police and the fire department. John, welcome to our program.
Thank you, my pleasure.
I'm happy to be responsible today for questioning our guests, again, as I've indicated, on this important topic. I think I shall start with you, Marcia, because you and I worked together to put this program together, and I believe you're responsible for our guests being here today and working with the not only Panhandle Health District, but I believe some other public servants in our community. Would you give us a little bit of background of what your office is trying to do with these experts and others to deal with hazardous materials as it relates to our part of the country?
Well, the health district's role is partly public education, and what we're trying to do with the training session that we had today and with these individuals who are here is to meet with the first responders, which are policemen and firemen, perhaps transportation department people who will be the first ones who might come upon a spill, a hazardous spill that might happen. And we had this session and invited these speakers in order to provide some training for these people.
In relation to that, I believe you have identified the groups, but you indicate that if there is an accident or a spill, and it may include hazardous materials, that obviously the police are called, and if there's a fire involved, the firemen. But you indicate that the transportation department will be coming in to assist. Those are the three most important local entities to be involved. Is that correct?
Well, when you have a spill, it depends on the spill. No spill is the same. No hazardous accident is the same. So it depends on who's called. Whoever's the first one on the scene, we've had an accident recently. It was the Department of Transportation was the first one. He happened to be driving down the road and just happened to come upon it. And then he called the local state police, and then they went through a system that they follow. And so you never know who's going to be the first one there to find it. If there's going to be a water quality problem, then the people that would be in charge of that are called. If it's going to be something that would endanger fish and wildlife, then the Fish and Game might be involved. So it depends on the spill itself.
One other question in this area, since you deal with it on a daily basis, what kind of problem are we talking about in our area, the Panhandle Health District that you serve? Do we have very many spills a year? Is it growing in number?
I couldn't answer that myself. We don't really have that many spills a year. I'd say we've probably had 4 this last year.
But each one could be a very possibly serious problem that could have a long-lasting effect.
Yes.
And 1 a year is too many, and that before you need to deal with it.
That's right.
One final question in that area. As you indicated, who might be up on the scene first, it could be someone from the general public rather than an expert. Do you have any kind of program in which you, other than things like this, do you try to inform the public of how to handle that with caution?
Oh, we haven't at this point. What we're concerned with now is getting the people who have to respond to it, and hopefully with more and more is coming out, publications and things where the public's more aware of the hazardous materials, and hopefully that will make them a little bit more aware. After we take care of the problem with maybe educating the first responders and people who are actually dealing with hazardous materials, we can go out and educate the public in general.
Maybe we can do that some today too as we proceed with the experts that you've provided for us. I would like to suggest to our other guests that maybe we should talk about some of the problems first on the large scale, and then we'll also move into the lab and its analysis and how it works. John, maybe we can proceed with some of the expertise you have.
Okay.
I guess a little background might be helpful. As an employee of Burlington Northern Railroad, I assume that you are responsible as their manager of any accidents that may take place in relation to that company and its transportation, but you do move beyond that to assist others that might have these problems, or at least involve yourself with the training and education.
Well, yes. Tony, my job entails not only preparedness for response, but the prevention activities on the part of the railroad. And education of the local first responders, who we do depend on, is a vital part of our prevention activities as well as our preparedness. We depend on those people, and we feel that we are obligated to help them prepare to do their jobs better. That is why we provide this kind of training, where we make an effort anywhere across our system to be available to help the local responders. Because many people do not have the economic resources to buy the training, we provide it, as a corporate service. We're a corporate citizen of the community, and we feel it's our obligation.
I think it's a very important point to make that you're involved with the preventive process, and I assume too also when it happens to try to keep it from being even more greater problem.
Yes.
Let's take this into two areas. First of all, let's talk about some of the possible spills that could take place through the transportation system of trucking companies, railroads, or whoever might be involved. What kind of hazardous materials are we talking about that are transported from some of those that are the most serious to some that be less serious? What kind of things are we dealing with?
Well, first, I can't speak for the trucking industry. What I know about the trucking industry, I have absorbed from people within it. But on the railroad industry, we are common carriers. And what that means is that we are required by law to transport any material that is tendered to us for transportation, as long as it is prepared in accordance with applicable regulations. So we can transport, theoretically, anything at any time, anywhere. Our history shows, on the other hand, that we are not a major chemical railroad. Burlington Northern is primarily coal and grain oriented. Our chemicals represent approximately 2.7% of our total traffic mix, and that works out to about 89,000 cars in 1984. Year in and year out, our traffic statistics stay pretty regular. The major commodities for us by volume stay the same from one year to the next. Primarily what we see are the liquefied petroleum gases, such as propane or butane, as our major commodity volume-wise. In second, anhydrous ammonia, because we are so big in farm country, it's used as a fertilizer, very widespread. And our third is typically sulfuric acid, which is used in a great deal by the paper industry. And being based heavily in the Northwest, we deal a lot with the paper industry. And we see those chemicals year in and year out in high volumes. But we can and we will transport anything, anywhere, at any time, because we are in the business of freight transportation.
Let's take some of those that you've given us example, and you choose what you wish, but let's suppose the unfortunate happens and accidents do happen. They're not obviously planned, they wouldn't be accidents.
Yes.
But when they take place, what are some of the, suppose that an accident takes place in a more urban setting, for example, what are some of the consequences that could take place if it's not handled properly?
It's very difficult to give a cookbook answer, because every hazardous material incident, just as Marcia said, is different from the last. But the exposure to the public is going to be greater in a highly populated area. And we have prevention activities focused there, and because we also have personnel focused in that area, we can provide more resources of manpower and economic resources to that kind of a spill. The problems, if it is mishandled, are obviously going to be more far-reaching because of the exposure to the public. But we are at the same hand, we are able to provide a better response. Response time is quicker. There is more expertise. There are more resources available to do that. If you take, for an example, an LP gas, propane, it's a very common material. It's used throughout the northern tier of states. We can pull a number of areas of expertise in, from chemical expertise to container expertise, railroad expertise. If it's a trucking incident, trucking companies. There are a number of contractors who are familiar with the product. We can call on all those resources, and we do as necessary to handle that problem. And while the exposure may be greater to a mishandled incident in a populated area, we also have the tools more readily available to keep it from being mishandled.
But when that accident takes place, oftentimes I would assume that you're talking a significant volume of material that's there that could be in the accident. And so if I'm correct, I believe that sometimes there is a small portion of that may be spilled, others, other materials there, but it could lead into an explosion and so forth. In other words, if there's a quick reaction, am I correct that you might result in less possible disaster? And that's where you're involved with training those who are on the scene first to
Yes.
keep that under control as much as possible.
I see what you are asking me. Yes, we are concerned that as a railroad of 29,000 miles long, we cannot be everywhere right away. And we do train these first responders because a response in a timely fashion is important. But just as important as doing it quickly is doing it properly. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, the vast history of experience for a fire department is dealing with structural fires, the kind of job they normally do, and there are special precautions and special actions to take in this situation. We urge the fire departments, is always in our training, that to know when to call for help, because there are people available to help them, and the response may not be immediate, due to geographic and other consideration, but we will respond with what is needed as we need it, and we feel we've been very effective.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you joined our program in progress, we have three guests, and we're talking about hazardous materials, in particular the transportation process, and if a spill takes place, what kind of actions we need immediately and on the long range also. I am at the present time talking with John Ogard, who is with Burlington Northern Railroad as their manager of hazardous materials. John, since you've been giving a workshop or training session today, I think it would be helpful to our viewers if we take this another step further and indicate some of the things that you told our firemen, our policemen, our transportation people about how to analyze the accident and what to do. If you just kind of take us through the do's and the do-nots of the process as they proceed with that.
All right. The first thing we try to get across to the responders is that in a hazardous material emergency, there are three priorities. The protection of life is first, protection of property comes second, and protection of the environment comes third. And as a corollary to that, we do not risk life to save property, do not risk life to save the environment. When they understand that their objective is to affect the outcome of that incident so that it has a quote-unquote happy ending, they keep those priorities in mind. That's the tone we try to set for our training. At that point, we discuss the hazardous material response problem from 2 points of view. One is that the part of the problem is the chemical itself, and the other part of the problem is the container in which the chemical is contained, because it's not hazardous when it's inside the container. It's only when it comes out that it's a problem. On the chemical side, I use a process of asking three questions. They need to know where the chemical is, they need to know what the chemical is, and they need to know what to do with it. And we feel that that kind of a process will keep them from getting in over their heads. That is one of our greatest fears, is that due to pressure or to lack of awareness, that they will not be aware that the situation they're faced with is beyond their capabilities. And we stress over and over again to, without committing yourself and your people, to assess the situation first, determine what is needed, and if you can do what is needed. If you can accomplish that, to go ahead. If you cannot, to pull back and do not involve yourself and risk your people further. On the container side, the railroad industry has unique containers we call tank cars. And part of the problem historically has been in education, that the fire departments, through no fault of their own, are not familiar with the packages, the tank cars that we use. So we try to familiarize them with the different types, with the different features of those, where their strong points are, where their more common weak points are, what our accident history has shown to be problems, and how they can help solve those problems. And then our final wrap-up is the message that please don't get in over your head. If you don't know that you can handle it, pull back, call for help, and get someone who can, because there are people available who can handle that situation.
So you may be dealing with a well-trained group of policemen and firemen who have been taught to act immediately. In a normal circumstance they would. So here you seem to be saying that more caution is involved, and maybe to not moving in immediately. Even, I would assume, when there's fire involved, that's the inclination, of course, always to go and put that out.
Yes, and that is a problem, that there's a popular misconception that the fire must be extinguished, and that is not always true. The fire, in many cases, should not be extinguished. I think the problem is not that the fire departments are unprepared, it's that the vast amount of their experience is tailored towards fighting a typical structural fire, or there may not be a typical structural fire, but that's their area of expertise, and different things need to be considered in hazardous material. And a major hazardous material spill for a local responder is very likely a once-in-a-lifetime occurrence. And it's difficult to train once every year, once every 2 years, and then never use your training and expect someone to remember it. So our problem is to keep coming back and keep the people trained, so that when that once-in-a-lifetime experience does occur, it hasn't been 5 years since they learned about hazardous material and they don't remember what exactly they were trained to do.
I think I can say this on behalf of our people in this area. We appreciate your being here, because some of the training that you're given could be of great benefit to our local people at some time when a hazardous accident takes place, and we appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I would also like to talk with Dr. Richard Roberts, who I introduced earlier as a specialist in toxicology and environmental chemicals, and is with the state lab in Boise. He's been kind enough to be here today to also assist in this process. Dr. Roberts, your role is a little bit different than John's, I believe, in that you're dealing, as you've indicated to me, with analytical analysis of smaller samples. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I guess oftentimes your lab and your work is involved after all of this process taking place, and you're trying to measure the long-range effects of what might happen to that in the environment. Am I correct?
That's mostly it. Sometimes we get involved with an identification. I don't know how often it occurs, but certainly it does occur that sometimes a spill is made and people leave the scene, and so there is no information whatsoever. Sometimes that happens, and if it does, then we get involved with maybe helping in the identification of what may have been spilled or left.
Since you are involved with this across Idaho and analyzing it, would you do some of the things that John has? First of all, would you tell us what are some of the problems that you face most often throughout the state of Idaho? What kind of chemical and hazardous problems or spills?
I think what we see mostly is the disrespect that people have for hazardous materials, hazardous chemicals, not on the scale that John's talking about, but on a smaller scale. Somebody may have a container of a very dangerous pesticide, and since it's small, he may take it out in his backyard, in the back alley, and dump it. The neighbor's kid may walk across this spill barefooted, and with some chemicals that could be lethal. So those are the kinds of things that I think that we deal with rarely, thank goodness.
But your office is available if someone had a problem and was or thought they might have. You certainly are available to analyze that and then tell them. Also, in addition to telling them if it's dangerous, do you have connections with those who can assist with expertise to remove that for them and without endangering health?
Yes, the Bureau of Hazardous Materials works very closely with our lab. In fact, we receive a great number of samples from them for analysis, and that's, correct me if I'm wrong, Marcia, I think primarily their job is to deal with those kinds of incidences and how to handle the material that's been disposed of.
Yeah, if it's a private, a private individual, they should call their district health department. We would tell them what to do with it and help them dispose of it if they just don't know what to do and have no idea. And or sometimes we get calls too if they don't know what they have. They found these bags in their garage that's been there for a long time, and a lot of times we've taken that and helped them find things to do. That seems to be people. That's another part where education comes in. They don't know what to do with it.
You have this close working relationship with the lab, and you can be in touch with them. Dr. Roberts, you impressed me with some comments you made before we did the program, and again, I see this program as serving an educational function, and you've alluded to it on the program. You indicate that when we deal with what some of us might perceive not to be hazardous is very hazardous, because I understand from you that some of those things that we look at, they do not have smell, they do not have warnings. Would you assist our public by, as John has in a different way, kind of going through a checklist of how people should proceed with caution and play it on the safe side?
Well, my stance is if a person comes across something that he has the slightest inclination that there might be a problem there, is to treat that as a very hazardous material right from the onset. That means don't be putting your finger in it to taste it or get it close to your nose to smell it. Take a sample of it with gloves on. Take great precautions not to come in contact with the skin, or in some cases, well, in any case, not to smell it. Because with some of the pesticides, for example, that we deal with, those actions could be lethal. So I would say that to begin with, treat every spill that they suspect as a hazardous spill and go from there. Now, if it's on a small scale, again, contact the district health departments or the Bureau of Hazardous Waste Materials, whichever is appropriate, and have those people help them out in how to dispose of it and how to deal with that.
With the problems that you face in chemical analysis, would there be situations in which individuals might be in contact or about to be in contact with materials that they could not even safely prepare themselves with masks and gloves? In other words, are the situation where they shouldn't even proceed at all but call specialists?
I suppose there are times like that. If there's even the slightest chance that may occur, yes, that would be the thing to do. Like I think it's just safe to say it is to play any incident on the extreme safe side. If you have to call somebody, that's you maybe are trying to make a decision as to call somebody. Call them, even if it's what we might call an over-safe reaction, would be my stance or my remark on that.
As you go through your analysis of chemical hazards, how is your lab equipped? Are they types of things that you cannot analyze? Do you have to ever call in assistance from a national lab?
Oh, yes. We have good assistance, particularly with the EPA lab, Region 10 lab it's just outside of Seattle. It's in Manchester, Washington. They have all the analytic instrumentation that we do not have, which is nice to have. The only problem in that is it delays maybe sometimes the identification, which we would like to have as promptly as possible. But by and large, we're fairly well equipped. There are some instruments that we vitally need that we don't have, and hopefully those will come about soon as a result of the hazardous waste program, particularly in South Idaho.
May I just address just one question to that area? There's been a lot of attention given in this state to some of the hazardous waste material in Hawaii County, I know. How is that progressing at this time? What do you see as the solution? I know some of the citizens in that area have been very, very concerned with what was happening and the environmental effects and health hazards that might be involved.
Yes. Our lab, to begin with, has done a great deal of analysis with respect to the samples that have been collected on that site, in addition to some that's been sent to EPA. And To make a long story short, I think at this point in time it seems to be fairly safe. I haven't been right on the ground, and I'm not involved with the committee actions that are involved with this. But based on what I've seen of the samples that have been sent to the lab and the results of those analyses, I don't see any cause for concern. I would hasten to say, too, that I would not be lax based on that statement. I would keep vigilance, in other words, a surveillance program on that dump site, because in the first place, a great deal of chemicals have been dumped there with no regulations whatsoever prior to the people that are there now. Now that it's being regulated, I feel better about it, but the problem is what was put there before and what's going to happen to those chemicals still remains and should be monitored. I think recently there has been a committee meeting on that site down there, and they have determined that at the present time it seems to be safely handled. That is, we don't see any leaching of chemicals that are of a dangerous nature.
I'm sure I would hear from some viewers if I didn't call upon the expertise I have here to ask this question before our time ends. There's a growing debate in our part of the state, particularly in the Coeur d'Alene area, that if Washington is selected as a nuclear waste site and transportation by trucks will be coming through our area, should we somehow try to prevent that from happening? Some stories are saying that a truck would come every 90 minutes, and if there was an accident, there could be hazardous health problems. As experts in the whole question of hazardous materials, is it possible to create transportation systems and containers for the transportation of nuclear waste that one can totally guarantee to a community that in time of an accident that they don't have anything to worry about? Who wishes to take that,
Seems to be
John?
looking at me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Statistically speaking, you cannot engineer for 100%, prevention. The statistics that I have heard from the Department of Energy and the people who design the radioactive shipping containers are that it's 1 in 1.5 million chance of an accident ever causing a breach of the container. Radioactive materials is the most tightly regulated commodity there is. From generation to shipping to use to disposal, every phase of it is extremely tight regulation. The shipping containers that radioactive waste, high-level radioactive waste, is used to transport those materials, they are designed not only to withstand the forces of transportation and the chemical or physical forces of the commodity, but the accident scenario as well. The tests that these people go through are extreme.
I have to interrupt. I'm so sorry, but thank you. That's very vital. I wish we could continue. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you've enjoyed our program, and I thank our guests for their great information. Please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the campus of North Idaho College and today's broadcast of the North